The year is 1764. In the warm summer hills of southern France, a young shepherdess guides her family's cattle into the vast forest of Mercoire. It seems a day like any other, the path familiar, the herd calm. Then, the forest falls silent. She looks around. Something has shifted between the trees. The young shepherdess led her herd back toward the village. She did not run, but every step was heavy with dread, the sense of unseen eyes upon her. The cattle snorted uneasily, as though they too felt the presence in the trees. By the time she reached home, she was pale and trembling. Later, she recounted that it had been moving toward her, but the bulls must have frightened it off. It all happened too fast. Yet she knew what she saw. She had seen wolves all her life. But this, she insisted, was not a wolf. Her account would become the first dark omen, the encounter that marked the beginning of it all. The story spread quickly through the villages of Gévaudan. This was a land long forgotten, harsh and enduring like its surrounding mountains. In the mid-18th century, it was a rugged, isolated corner of southern France. Deep forests, windswept plateaus, valleys shrouded in mist. Life here was hard, the soil poor, the winters unforgiving. Their lives were bound to the land, to the flocks of sheep and herds of cattle that were their only wealth. Each day, women and children tended these animals in distant pastures and quiet forests, far from the stone walls of their villages. It was a simple rhythm, carried out with only a dog beside and a wooden staff in hand. But soon, something would step into the path of this ancient routine. On the last day of June, 1764, the silence broke. In the pasture above Le Cibac, near the village of Saint-Étienne-de-Lugdarès, a shepherd girl failed to return with her flock. Her name was Jeanne Boulet. She was just 14. As dusk settled over the hills, searchers set out across the fields and into the woods. Not long after, at the edge where the grass met the trees, they found a sight too cruel to describe. Whatever it was, it had ravaged the poor girl beyond recognition, leaving only torn remnants scattered at the edge of the forest, ruin where she had stood that morning. In the parish register, the priest's words are spare. He wrote that Jeanne was buried without the final sacraments, meaning she had died too quickly, too violently, for any rites to be given. But it was his next line that unsettled even the doubtful. He did not write wolf. He wrote la bête féroce, the ferocious beast. He attributed her death specifically to it. The use of this formal title, this proper name, in an official church document was already a chilling signal, though nobody then could have imagined what would follow. Through the long, hot days of August and into the shortening light of autumn, the beast grew bolder. It struck in pastures and along forest paths, spreading terror through the Allier valleys and the margeride forests, leaving horror and dread in its wake. With each new victim, the description of the creature grew more detailed. Those who survived or glimpsed it from afar spoke of an animal the size of a calf, with thick matted fur and an unusually large head. Some accounts even likened it to that of a pig. Yet it was the reports of its behavior that began to sow a deeper dread. An unsettling pattern began to emerge, one of unexplainable cruelty. The victims were predominantly women and children, caught alone in the open country. The violence was far beyond the needs of a simple predator. It did not behave like an animal feeding to survive, often leaving its victims mutilated, barely consumed if at all. More than anything, it was this that felt so unsettling. The killing was deliberate, the injuries seemed purposeful, and the absence of feeding left behind a mystery. Reports grew more gruesome by the week. On October 19th, a 20-year-old woman was found near Saint-Alban, so ravaged that the accounts claimed the beast had drained her. This detail, whether literal or born of shock, fed the growing belief that this was no mere animal. Amid the growing terror, the legend of its invincibility took root. On October 8th, just weeks earlier, a group of local men caught sight of the beast. It was trailing a herdsman across a clearing. The men shouted and raised their muskets. They chased it into the woods. Hearts pounding, minds fixed on the chance to return as saviors. Fear clung to them, but so did something else. The hope of ending it. Of being the ones to bring the nightmare to a close. They crashed through the trees, branches lashing at their faces, boots thudding through damp undergrowth. The creature vanished into the forest, but they pressed on. Then suddenly, they met it. They raised their muskets, crude, unreliable weapons, but deadly at close range, and fired a volley. The sound echoed through the valley. The creature fell. For a single, breathless moment, they felt a surge of triumph, of relief. It was over. But then, the impossible happened. The animal stirred. It rose slowly to its feet, shook its massive body, and with a speed that defied its size, vanished back into the forest. The story spread faster than a wildfire. It could not be killed by bullets. It was unholy. It was invincible. News eventually reached the distant authorities. The state's first answer was spectacle, a show of military force. Captain Jean-Baptiste Duhamel rode into Gévaudan at the head of his dragoons. Blue coats, carrying the weight of order into the troubled province. Duhamel was a professional soldier, trained to face flesh and blood enemies. He scoffed at the peasants' tales of demons and curses. To him, this was a wolf, and wolves could be killed. He threw the weight of the countryside into the fight. Vast, sweeping hunts scoured the forests, with thousands of local men and boys pressed into service as beaters, driving the fields in great, clattering lines. Poisoned bait, prepared hunks of meat laced with strychnine, was scattered across the hillsides. Nothing touched them. Desperation grew. In one bizarre ruse, Duhamel even ordered soldiers into bonnets and skirts, hoping to lure the beast into an ambush by posing as its favored prey. But the creature did not come. It seemed to anticipate every move, to slip away just before the noose could tighten. It melted into the forests and ravines, only to reappear miles away, leaving another savaged body behind. The harder they tried, the clearer it became. They were not hunting it. It was always one step ahead. Duhamel's private letters seethed with a soldier's frustration. He wrote of having the creature in his sights, just once, a clear shot. But at the critical moment, his own men, clumsy and terrified, made a noise and scared it away. He lamented the incident as the most crushing disappointment of his life. After months of fruitless pursuit through a brutal, snow-choked winter, Duhamel and his dragoons retreated in disgrace. The army had failed. The crown, now deeply embarrassed by this public display of impotence, turned from soldiers to specialists. In February of 1765, Jean-Charles d'Enneval and his son arrived from Normandy. They were living legends, professional wolf hunters, louvetiers, who boasted of having personally slain over 1,200 wolves. The Parisian press hailed their arrival. These were the heroes who would finally end the nightmare. Yet their famed expertise proved utterly useless. They killed dozens of local wolves, parading their carcasses through the villages, but the attacks on people continued without a single pause. The d'Enneval's failure was, in a way, even more damning than Duhamel's. If the most famous wolf slayers in the entire kingdom could not stop the creature, it gave powerful, terrifying support to the growing conviction that the beast was no wolf at all. This string of failures created a deeper puzzle, that a single creature, whatever it was, could outwit soldiers, hunters, and the full might of the French state was unthinkable. And so, the image of the beast began to change. With every report, it grew less like a wolf and more like something unknown. Captain Duhamel himself helped shape this legend. In his official dispatches, he described it in increasingly fantastic terms. It was a weird hybrid animal, he wrote, a chimera with the powerful chest of a horse and the sleek, terrifying body of a leopard. In his words, it was no longer a mere predator. It had become a monster. How could any man be expected to kill such a thing? The story soon spread beyond Gévaudan. Newspapers carried Duhamel's reports across France, and with them came details too strange to ignore. They wrote that the beast's hide turned aside musket balls, that it gave off a suffocating stench, that it could leap impossible distances and vanish into thin air. These were not tavern whispers or peasant superstition. They were printed in respectable papers, drawn from official accounts. Out of failure and rumor, print and retelling, the beast grew into something more than flesh and blood. As the bitter winter of 1764 bled into 1765, the terror in Gévaudan reached a fever pitch. The cold and snow offered no safety. The attacks grew more frequent, more audacious. The crisis had become so profound that it transcended the material world and entered the spiritual. The Bishop of Mende, Gabriel Florent de Choiseul-Beaupré, the highest authority in this devout land, issued a formal commandment to be read in every church. He framed the beast in the only terms that made sense in their worldview. It was a divine scourge, a monster sent by God to punish the people for their sins. He called for universal prayer, for fasting and penance.
Silence! Écoutez bien. Le fléau qui s'abat sur nos vallées n'est point un simple animal, ni une créature née de la terre.
It was an act of spiritual warfare. It was met with a grim and immediate refutation from the forces of darkness. On the very day the bishop's mandate was to be enacted, the beast struck twice, killing 2 more people in separate locations. For the faithful of Gévaudan, this was not a coincidence. It was a message. It was chilling, horrifying proof that they faced an evil beyond the reach of prayer, a creature of demonic, not divine origin. In their minds, God had not sent it, and he could not stop it. In January of 1765 alone, 26 people were attacked. A 14-year-old boy named Jean Chateauneuf was killed and mutilated. And then, a detail that speaks to the deep psychological torment of the era, a story began to circulate. Days after the boy's death, the beast was said to have returned to his village at night. It was reportedly seen motionless at the window of his home, its massive head and glowing eyes peering through the window, as if observing the family that mourned him. The carnage escalated through the spring. In March, a 40-year-old woman was devoured. Days later, a 20-year-old girl was eaten in the village of Fayette. The parish records from April grow even more gruesome. The body of a 13-year-old boy, Marshall Charade, was found with injuries described by contemporary accounts as deeply disturbing. In another village, a woman and 2 young girls were found, their deaths bearing similar horrific patterns to previous attacks. Yet, even in this landscape of relentless horror, there were moments of extraordinary defiance. These were not stories of soldiers or famed hunters, but of ordinary people who, when faced with the ultimate terror, found a strength they did not know they possessed. January 12th, 1765. Near the village of Saint-Alban, a group of children tend their cattle on the edge of a frozen field. The oldest is 12, Jacques Portefeuille. Their boots crunch against the snow. Their breath clouds the air. Silence presses in from the deep forest. The cattle shift and grunt. Then a shape emerges. Massive, low-slung, with matted fur and eyes that burn like coals. The beast. It moves with deliberate purpose, each step cutting through the brittle calm like a blade. The children freeze. The youngest begins to cry. But Jacques doesn't move. He doesn't run. None of them do. They raise their staffs, simple wooden poles tipped with knives, tied on with twine and strips of cloth. They form a circle, small, desperate, and trembling. The beast lowers its head and charges. Snow flies. The circle breaks. Screams rise. The creature crashes through and seizes the smallest boy in its jaws. The others recoil, all but Jacques. He lunges without thinking, striking the beast's flank with everything he has. A shallow wound, but enough to make it flinch. The others follow. They swarm it, striking at the creature again and again. Their blows can hardly pierce its hide, but their fury and unity are overwhelming. The beast reels and, for the first time, retreats. It drops the boy and vanishes into the forest. Silence returns, broken only by panting, sobbing, and the wind. The children stand, injured and shaken, but alive. All of them. That day, the people of Gévaudan learned the beast could bleed. Word of their defiance traveled quickly, all the way to Versailles. King Louis XV was so moved by their courage that he sent them a reward: gold for the children. And for Jacques Portefeuille, the boy who refused to run, the king decreed an education paid by the crown. A shepherd's son, now a symbol of resistance, of bravery, of the moment the beast was driven back. But Jacques was not the only one to defy the beast. Others, too, rose against it, not with rifles or royal decrees, but with bare hands and unbreakable will. Another story, whispered through the villages and carried to the king's own court, was that of a mother. March 14th, 1765. Saint-Alban. The door creaks open as Jean Jouve steps outside, a bowl of bread dough still balanced on her hip. Her daughter twirls in the yard, spinning little Jean-Pierre by the arms. Laughter fills the cold spring air. A sudden silence breaks the happy atmosphere. The cattle down by the pasture begin to bristle. Jeanne lifts her head. A shadow breaks from the tree line. The beast moves like thunder, fast, low, unstoppable. Before Jeanne can scream, it is already on them. Her daughter shrieks as it seizes her arm. Jeanne charges. She slams into the creature's side, fists flying, shrieking, clawing at its fur. The beast snarls and drops the girl. Then it turns, and Jean-Pierre is standing right there, frozen, tiny, alone. Their eyes meet. For just a moment, everything is still. Then the beast lunges. It seizes him and bolts into the woods, dragging him as branches close behind. And then they vanish into the forest. Jeanne doesn't stop. She runs, screaming, injured, crashing through thorns and branches. Her arms are badly hurt. Her vision blurs as she runs. Her dress snags and rips. Her older children follow, shouting, throwing stones, calling his name. But the creature has vanished. Eventually, deeper in the woods, they find him. Jean-Pierre lies in the underbrush, barely breathing. The beast is gone. Jeanne drops to her knees, gathers him up, and holds him tightly, rocking him in the dirt. Her screams now quiet sobs into his hair. He lived, but only briefly. Jeanne didn't speak after the attack, but the story spread without her. The king awarded her 300 livres, a gesture of honor, but no sum could restore what was lost. By the summer of 1765, the ongoing slaughter in Gévaudan was no longer just a provincial tragedy. It was a source of profound political embarrassment for the French monarchy. The failures of the army and its hand-picked experts reflected poorly on the king's power, making him look weak and ineffectual. A final, decisive intervention was required, one designed as much to restore the crown's authority as to end the killings. In June, the king dispatched his own man, François Antoine, his personal gun-bearer and lieutenant of the hunt. Antoine was no provincial captain or boastful freelancer. He was a highly respected member of the king's own household, a man of status and influence. His arrival on June 22nd was a clear signal. This was now a royal affair. For Antoine, the hysteria was absurd. He was a man of logic and reason, convinced he was hunting nothing more than an unusually large and aggressive wolf. His own notes on the creature's tracks confirmed his bias.
Comme je le pensais, un loup. Un loup extraordinairement grand.
They showed, he wrote, no difference with the foot of a great wolf. Antoine spent months scouring the countryside, his methodical hunt marked by the same maddening frustrations that had plagued his predecessors. The beast seemed to mock him, to play with him. In August, it was spotted near the very castle where Antoine was staying, only to slip through his grasp. Just hours later, it killed a young woman less than 500 meters from his lodging. It was a direct, insolent challenge. A breakthrough finally came on September 20th, 1765. Acting on a tip, Antoine and his men set an ambush in the woods of a royal abbey at Les Chazes. As they waited in the tense silence, an enormous wolf emerged from a thicket and walked directly towards him. It was the largest he had ever seen. Antoine raised his heavy shotgun, a weapon designed for killing large game, and fired. The animal was struck hard, the blast echoing like a cannon. It fell to the ground. The creature struggled back to its feet, intent on escape. Before it could move, one of Antoine's game wardens fired a second, definitive shot. This time, it did not get up. The animal was immense, a creature of shocking proportions for a European wolf. It measured nearly 6 feet long and weighed 130 pounds. A specimen so large, so imposing, that it provided a credible candidate for the monster. The killing of this great wolf was less a zoological event than a carefully managed piece of political theater. The crown needed a victory, and François Antoine delivered one. In his official report, he declared with confidence, "We never saw a big wolf that could be compared to this one. Hence, we believe this could be the fearsome beast that caused so much damage." To cement the official truth, a series of public validations were arranged. Survivors of earlier attacks, including the now famous Portefeuille children, were brought to view the carcass. Before a gathering of onlookers, they pointed to scars on the animal's body that they claimed matched the wounds they had inflicted. Whether guided by subtle pressure or swept up in the desperate hope that the nightmare was finally over, they gave the confirmation everyone was waiting for. A surgeon was summoned to perform the autopsy, but a contemporary report noted one quietly troubling detail. The animal's stomach was empty. No human remains. Nothing to suggest it had ever hunted people. The contradiction was noted, and then swiftly ignored. The story had found its ending, or so it seemed. The body of the Wolf of Chazes was preserved, stuffed with straw, and sent to the royal court at Versailles. It was presented to the king and put on public display, a powerful, tangible symbol of the monarchy's power to conquer the wild chaos that threatened its domain. François Antoine was hailed as a national hero. He was showered with riches, titles, and royal favor. The case of the Beast of Gévaudan was officially and very publicly closed. The celebrations at court, however, were tragically premature. An uneasy quiet settled over the haunted hills of Gévaudan. People began to hope again. Then, in early December 1765, the impossible happened. 2 young boys were attacked near the village of La Bessère-Sainte-Marie. They survived the encounter, but the message was clear and cold. It was back. In the weeks that followed, a dozen more fatal attacks were reported, all concentrated in the same area. This second wave of terror would last for another 18 agonizing months, claiming at least 30 more lives. Some witnesses claimed this new beast was different. It was bolder, more aggressive. For the people who had believed the nightmare over, who had celebrated Antoine's triumph and buried their fear, the news was crushing. It shattered the fragile hope that Gévaudan had finally been freed. But the most devastating part of this renewed terror was the silence from Versailles. Having already declared victory, having celebrated its hero and displayed its trophy, the monarchy had a vested political interest in the story being over. Reports of new killings from the remote province were dismissed as exaggerated accounts of ordinary wolf attacks, conflated by a superstitious peasantry with the now legendary beast. For King Louis XV and his court, the monster had been slain. The case was closed. This royal abandonment was a crushing, final blow to the people of Gévaudan. They had been forsaken, left to face the horror completely, utterly alone. As the death toll mounted through 1766 and into 1767, a young local nobleman, the Marquis d'Apcher, decided he could stand by no longer. With no hope of aid from the king, he stepped into the void. He refused to let his people be slaughtered. He took matters into his own hands, using his own fortune to fund and organize a massive hunt. This was different from the royal hunts. It was comprised of 300 local men, farmers, blacksmiths, woodsmen, who knew the terrain better than any royal dragoon. This was no longer a mission of the state. It was an act of communal survival, led by one of their own. Among the hand-picked marksmen in the Marquise's hunt was a man named Jean Chastel. He was a local farmer and innkeeper from the very heart of the area where the new attacks had been concentrated. He was a strange figure, a man of few words and deep, unsettling piety, and viewed with some suspicion by his neighbors. He and his sons had even been briefly imprisoned by François Antoine 2 years earlier, after a confrontation with the royal guards. He was an outsider in his own community. June 19th, 1767. The forests of Tenazaire. The air is thick, heavy with the promise of a storm. 300 men push through the undergrowth. Branches snap. Leaves crunch underfoot. Their shouts echo through the trees, a closing net of sound and steel. At a place called the Saulne d'Auvers, the forest suddenly goes quiet. A signal passes down the line. The beast is sighted. But one man is not with them, Jean Chastel. He sits on a rock, still as the stone beneath him. His rifle rests across his lap. The chaos of the hunt is a distant wave. Here, there is only the hum of insects and the thump of his own heart. His lips move, whispering the words of a prayer. A shadow detaches from the trees. The beast emerges. It simply steps into the clearing, 20 paces away. Its fur is a matted ruin. A scarred muzzle lifts, sniffing the air. Its eyes are dull coals, ancient and empty. They find the old man on the rock. The beast stops. It watches him. Other hunters see it now. They freeze. Rifles feel useless in their hands. Their breath catches in their throats. Chastel does not move. He finishes his prayer. The whisper dies. He slowly, deliberately, closes the worn leather book. A soft thump in the dead quiet. He tucks the book into his coat. His hand finds the cold wood of his rifle stock. Legends say he had cast the bullet himself. Silver. He lifts the rifle. His eye finds the iron sight. It aligns on the creature's chest. The beast just stands there, waiting. He pulls the trigger. The beast staggered. then collapsed into the grass, heavy, motionless. The animal Chastel killed was immediately subjected to an intense formal examination. A local notary, Roch-Étienne Marin, drew up a detailed official report, a document that would become known as the Rapport Marin. It described a creature of monstrous appearance, with unusual reddish-gray fur, a massive head, and body proportions that seemed to validate the most fantastic eyewitness accounts from the past 3 years. But the most important discovery, the one that would finally end the debate and close the book on the nightmare, came during the autopsy. In stark, horrifying contrast to the empty stomach of François Antoine's celebrated wolf, the surgeon who opened this creature found human remains inside. They identified fragments believed to belong to a young girl, presumed to be Jeanne Bastide, the beast's last victim, killed just 2 days before. This was it, the absolute, undeniable proof. This was the man-eater. The grand celebrations, the royal rewards, the stuffed trophy at Versailles, they had all been for the wrong monster. The true killer had been brought down not by the king's finest hunter with his wealth of resources, but by a strange, quiet farmer from a forgotten corner of the kingdom, with a single, fabled bullet. After Jean Chastel fired his shot on that June day in 1767, the attacks in Gévaudan stopped. They never started again. The nightmare was finally and truly over. The beast was dead, but its legend would stalk the forests of history forever. A chilling reminder of a time when a monster held an entire nation in the grip of primal fear. It left behind a mystery that endures to this day. What was it really? A wolf? A hybrid? Or something else entirely? A creature that has, thankfully, never been seen again.